What happens when a decorated military officer, trained to face enemies on the battlefield, finds herself face to face with injustice in her own hometown? On a quiet night in Burlington, North Carolina, a routine traffic stop spiraled into a clash between authority abused and authority earned. This is not just a story of one woman's courage. It's a reckoning that asks us all, when power goes unchecked, will we stay silent or will we stand? Picture this with me for a moment. It's 11:08 p.m. on a Wednesday night in Burlington, North Carolina. You know those nights when the whole world feels like it's holding its breath? The main streets are empty, store signs flickered off hours ago, and the only sound is the occasional whoosh of a car passing through town. It's the kind of peaceful night that makes you think nothing important ever happens in small towns. But here's the thing about life. It has a way of proving us wrong when we least expect it. Lieutenant Colonel Selene Carter was driving home that night, her hands steady on the wheel of a plain black SUV. No fancy chrome, no flashy decals, just government-issued and practical, exactly the way she liked things. After 15 years in the military, Selene had learned to appreciate the beauty of blending in rather than standing out. She'd just finished a long meeting at Fort Ashton, 2 hours south, and her mind was already drifting toward home. You know that feeling when you're driving at night, and your brain starts planning that perfect moment when you'll finally kick off your shoes and sink into your favorite chair? That's exactly where her thoughts were, nowhere near the storm that was about to hit. Selene wasn't speeding. She wasn't weaving between lanes or talking on her phone. She was just a woman driving home after a long day of serving her country. But sometimes, that's all it takes to catch the attention of someone looking for trouble. In a small gravel turnout off Elmwood Avenue, Sergeant Travis Holt was sitting in his patrol car, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. 15 years on the force had given him the kind of hardened look that came from too many late shifts and not enough excitement. His phone glowed in the darkness as he scrolled mindlessly, waiting for something, anything, to make his night more interesting. And then Selene's SUV passed by. Now, I want you to understand something about Sergeant Holt. He was the kind of officer who saw his badge not as a responsibility, but as a license. The kind of man who'd grown comfortable using his authority to fill the empty spaces in his own life. And on this particular night, an unfamiliar vehicle driving through his territory was reason enough, at least in his mind, to stir things up. The red and blue lights erupted behind Selene like lightning in a clear sky. She glanced up at her rearview mirror, and for just a moment, I imagine she felt that sinking feeling we all get when we see those flashing lights. But Selene Carter wasn't just anyone. This was a woman who'd served 2 deployments overseas, who'd earned a Bronze Star, who'd learned to keep her composure when shells were falling around her. A traffic stop wasn't going to rattle her. She pulled over with practiced calm, hands visible on the wheel, engine off, waiting. Sergeant Holt stepped out of his cruiser and slammed the door with more force than necessary. He was tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of presence that was meant to intimidate. His hand rested casually on his holster, casual but unmistakable, while his other hand gripped a flashlight like a weapon. He didn't bother with the usual approach of checking the passenger side first. He walked straight to her window, his boots crunching on the gravel, already radiating aggression before he'd even seen her face. "License and registration," he barked. "No, good evening." "No, do you know why I stopped you?" Just a command, delivered like she was already guilty of something. Selene kept her hands where he could see them and spoke in that measured tone she'd perfected over years of military leadership. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" Holt shined his flashlight directly into her face, forcing her to squint. "You were drifting between lanes. Didn't signal. Looked like you might be under the influence." Now here's where this story gets interesting. Because Selene knew, and deep down Holt knew too, that none of that was true. She'd been driving perfectly straight, well within her lane, stone-cold sober. But sometimes the truth isn't the point. Sometimes it's about power, and who gets to wield it. "I wasn't," she said simply. Just 2 words, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. "License and registration," Holt repeated, louder this time, like volume could somehow make his lies more convincing. Without protest, Selene reached for her documents, moving slowly and deliberately. She'd been trained to de-escalate, to comply, to survive encounters like this. "That's a government vehicle," she noted as she handed over her ID. "I'm a federal employee." Holt glanced at her military ID, and I swear I can picture the moment when his ego and his common sense went to war in his head. The The smart move would have been to hand everything back, offer a polite warning, and move on with his night. But Sergeant Holt wasn't interested in smart moves. "You military?" he asked, and there was something in his tone. Not respect, but challenge. "Yes. Doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said I was." But here's what Selene's calm response really said. "I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly what you're doing." The tension in the air shifted, like the moment before lightning strikes. Holt stepped closer to her window, his shadow cutting across her face. "Step out of the vehicle for me." I can only imagine what went through Selene's mind in that moment. She'd followed every rule, answered every question, complied with every request. And now this man was escalating a situation that should have been over before it started. "Excuse me?" she asked. "Out of the car." "Sobriety check." Her jaw tightened, the first crack in her composure. "On what grounds?" "I've complied with everything you've asked." "I haven't been drinking." Holt didn't like that. He really didn't like the fact that this woman was asking reasonable questions instead of simply obeying his commands. "Now you're refusing a lawful order?" "No," Selene said, her voice still steady as stone. "I'm asking for clarification." And that's when Sergeant Holt made the mistake that would change both of their lives forever. Instead of answering her reasonable question, instead of explaining his actions like any professional officer should, he reached forward and yanked her door handle. "Exit the vehicle. Now." That's the moment when Selene Carter made a decision that would echo far beyond this dark roadside. She reached calmly for her phone, pressed record, and held it where both of them could see it. "Just so we're clear," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded respect on battlefields around the world. "This interaction is being documented." For the first time that night, Holt hesitated. You could almost see the gears turning in his head, the sudden realization that his actions were being captured, that there would be a record of this moment. But his ego was louder than his caution, and he'd already gone too far to back down now. "Out of the car," he repeated. So Selene obeyed. She stepped out with her back straight and her head held high, every movement precise and controlled. Even in civilian clothes, even in the middle of this humiliating encounter, she carried herself with a dignity that Holt couldn't quite understand or define. Under the orange wash of streetlights, he made her perform field sobriety tests. "Walk the line. Follow the finger with your eyes. Stand on one foot." Each test performed flawlessly, each result ignored. Because this was never about whether she was impaired. This was about a man drunk on his own power, determined to prove he could make anyone bend to his will. When she passed every test, and they both knew she would, Holt still wrote her a citation. "Failure to maintain lane," he scrawled on the ticket, as if writing it down could somehow make his lie true. Selene took the ticket in silence. She didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She simply returned to her car and drove away, leaving Sergeant Holt standing under those streetlights, probably feeling very pleased with himself. For Holt, this was just another night, another flex of authority, another story to tell his buddies in the break room about how he'd shown some uppity federal employee who was really in charge on his streets. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that Selene Carter was just like everyone else he'd bullied over the years, that she'd take her ticket, nurse her wounded pride in private, and move on with her life. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The next morning, while Holt was probably sleeping off his night shift, Selene Carter was sitting in her office at Fort Ashton, staring at her phone. The video was still there, clear, undeniable evidence of what had happened. She could delete it, file the ticket away, and pretend it never happened. She could choose the path of least resistance, the way so many others had before her. But as she sat there in the early morning light, Selene realized something that would change everything. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every soldier she'd mentored who might face the same abuse. This was about every civilian who didn't have the rank or the training or the resources to fight back. This was about the difference between accepting injustice and doing something about it. So she made a choice that would send ripples through both of their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. She picked up her phone and started making calls. The storm that had been brewing on that quiet Wednesday night was about to break wide open. And Sergeant Travis Holt was about to learn that some people don't just bend, they push back. The sun was coming up over Fort Ashton, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, but Lieutenant Colonel Selene Carter hadn't slept a wink. She sat in her office, the video from the night before glowing on her phone screen, and I can only imagine the thoughts running through her mind. She could hear her aide, Sergeant Brooks, making coffee in the outer office, the familiar sounds of another day beginning. But this wasn't going to be just another day. This was the day when Selene Carter had to decide who she really was, someone who accepted injustice, or someone who fought it. You see, most of us, when we face that kind of abuse of power, we tell ourselves stories to make it easier to swallow. It's not worth the fight. Nothing will change anyway. I'll just make things worse for myself. These are the whispers that keep broken systems running, that let bullies keep bullying. But as Selene stared at that video, watching herself stay calm while a man with a badge tried to intimidate her, watching him escalate a nothing situation into something ugly, she realized something profound. Silence wasn't protection. It was complicity. Sergeant Brooks knocked and entered with 2 steaming cups. "You look like you didn't sleep, ma'am. Everything okay?" Selene looked up from her phone. "No, Brooks. But I'm about to fix it." That morning, she made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First to internal affairs at the Burlington Police Department. Then to the office of the Inspector General. Finally to her legal team. Each conversation was calm, methodical, professional. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent her career making difficult decisions under pressure. But here's what makes this story so powerful. Selene wasn't looking for revenge. She wasn't trying to destroy anyone's life out of spite. She was simply refusing to let abuse of power go unchecked. There's a difference between those things, and it's the difference between justice and vengeance. Meanwhile, across town, Sergeant Travis Holt was probably waking up feeling pretty good about himself. He'd logged his citation with minimal details, dropped his body cam in the charging dock like it was any other night, and was already bragging to his colleagues about the Fed woman who thought her ID meant something. But Officer Ramirez, a younger cop with more sense than swagger, was frowning. "Wait, what did you say her name was?" "Carter. Selene Carter." "Why?" Ramirez's face went pale. "Lieutenant Colonel Carter? She spoke at our academy graduation last year. She's not just military. She runs logistics at Fort Ashton. Bronze Star, 2 deployments. She's kind of a big deal." For a split second, you could see doubt flicker across Holt's face. But his pride was stronger than his common sense. "Don't care who she is," he shrugged. "On my streets, I'm the authority." Famous last words, right? The cracks in Holt's world started small. A formal complaint filed. A request for his body cam footage. Questions from his captain about the stop. But like all bullies, Holt had gotten comfortable thinking he was untouchable. He figured it would all blow over like it always had before. He was wrong. 3 weeks later, Holt was sitting at his kitchen table, sorting through his mail, when he found an envelope that made his coffee go cold. A civil summons. His hands actually shook as he tore it open, expecting maybe a minor citation or routine paperwork. Instead, he found himself listed as defendant in Carter versus Holt, a federal civil rights complaint citing unlawful detainment, intimidation, and abuse of authority under color of law. The lawsuit wasn't asking for millions. It wasn't seeking to destroy his career or his family. It was asking for exactly what it was worth: accountability, a public record, and enough in damages to make sure this kind of behavior had real consequences. But for the first time in his 15-year career, Travis Holt felt something he wasn't used to feeling: fear. His captain, Lawson, called him into the office that same day. "Travis, we need to talk. This isn't just some angry motorist filing a complaint. This is a decorated military officer with an impeccable record, video evidence from 2 angles, and a legal team that knows exactly what they're doing." Holt tried to salvage his bravado. "It's her word against mine." "No," Lawson said, sliding a tablet across the desk. "It's her video against your body cam. And frankly, they both tell the same story, one that doesn't look good for you." That's when the reality started to sink in. For years, Holt had been protected by the thin blue line, by the assumption that his word as an officer would always carry more weight than a civilian complaint. But he'd picked the wrong civilian this time. Meanwhile, Selene was preparing for court with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else in her life. Her attorney, David Keller, was impressed by her composure. "Are you sure you want to go through with this publicly? It'll be on record forever. It'll follow you." Selene's response was simple and devastating. "Good. Let it." You see, she understood something that took me years to learn. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be ashamed of someone else's actions. Holt had tried to humiliate her, but she was turning that moment into something larger. A statement that abuse of power wouldn't be tolerated, not even when it came wearing a badge. The day of the trial arrived like Judgment Day. Selene walked into that courtroom wearing her full-dress uniform, every ribbon, every medal, every symbol of her service to her country displayed with quiet pride. She wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. She was simply showing the jury exactly who Travis Holt had decided to mess with. On the other side of the courtroom, Holt sat in an ill-fitting suit, his usual swagger nowhere to be found. For the first time, he was the one feeling small. The testimony began, and Selene spoke with the same calm authority she'd shown on that roadside. No drama, no emotional manipulation, just the facts, delivered with devastating precision. I complied with every request, she testified. I asked reasonable questions. I was met with escalating aggression for no justifiable reason. When Officer Holt ordered me out of the vehicle, I complied. When he administered field sobriety tests, I passed them all. Yet he still issued a citation for a violation that never occurred. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for, the videos. First, Selene's phone footage played on the courtroom screens. Crystal clear. Undeniable. You could hear Holt's aggressive tone, see his hand hovering near his weapon, watch him escalate a routine stop into something ugly. Then his body cam footage rolled. Same encounter, different angle, but the story was identical. There was Holt, drunk on his own power, dismissing every reasonable response, pushing harder when he should have backed down. The jury was silent, transfixed. You could feel the weight of truth settling over that courtroom like morning fog. The defense attorney tried everything. Isn't it possible Officer Holt was following standard protocol? No, Selene answered firmly. Could he have been concerned for public safety? I was sober, compliant, and cooperative. There was no safety concern. Then why did you choose to record the encounter? This was the moment that defined everything. Selene looked directly at the jury and said, "Because I've lived long enough to know that silence isn't protection. It's permission. The badge isn't a license to abuse people. It's a responsibility to serve them." Those words hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. When it was Holt's turn to testify, his mask finally slipped completely. Under cross-examination, when asked if he would have acted differently had he known Selene was a lieutenant colonel, he made the mistake of being honest. Probably. There it was. The confession that revealed everything. He hadn't seen a person that night. He'd seen someone he thought he could push around without consequences. Someone who wouldn't fight back. Someone who would accept his abuse because she had no choice. He was wrong on every count. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Their verdict was swift and decisive, in favor of Lieutenant Colonel Carter. Constitutional rights violated. Abuse of authority. Damages awarded, $35,000. But here's the thing about justice, it's not really about the money. It's about the public record. It's about the precedent. It's about sending a message that echoes far beyond one courthouse in one small town. As the verdict was read, there was no dramatic celebration, no tears of joy. Selene simply nodded, gathered her things, and walked out of that courtroom the same way she'd walked into it, with dignity intact and justice served. Outside, reporters waited with cameras and questions, but Selene's attorney handled them with a simple statement. Lieutenant Colonel Carter sought accountability, not publicity. Today, she received it. Sergeant Travis Holt left through a side door, head down, shielding his face from the cameras. The man who'd been so eager to flex his authority was now running from the consequences of his actions. Within weeks, he was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Rumors swirled through the Burlington Police Department, reassignment, demotion, maybe worse. The untouchable sergeant had become very touchable indeed. But the real victory happened 2 months later, back at Fort Ashton. Selene stood before a room full of fresh recruits, their faces young and eager, their uniforms crisp with possibility. She could have talked about logistics or supply chains or any of the technical aspects of military service. Instead, she talked about leadership. "How many of you think that rank automatically earns you respect?" she asked. Hands went up, tentative, hopeful. "I understand why you'd think that," she said gently. "But here's the truth that took me years to learn. Respect isn't owed. It's earned. Every single day, with every single choice you make." The room was completely silent. Power, whether it's rank or a badge, or any kind of authority, isn't a shield. It's a weight. And if you can't carry that weight with honor, you don't deserve to carry it at all. She paused, looking into each of their faces. "A few months ago, I was stopped by a police officer who forgot that truth. He saw my compliance as weakness and my questions as defiance. He escalated when he should have de-escalated. He abused when he should have served. You could hear a pin drop. I could have stayed quiet. I could have paid the ticket and moved on with my life. But silence protects the guilty, not the innocent. So I documented what happened. I filed complaints. I showed up in court, and I told the truth. One young recruit raised her hand. What happened to him, ma'am? Selene's smile was sad but satisfied. He learned that the badge doesn't make you untouchable. Character does. Integrity does. Serving others instead of serving yourself. That's what makes you untouchable. As she left that classroom, Selene knew she'd planted seeds that would grow far beyond her own experience. These young soldiers would carry her lesson with them, and hopefully they'd never forget it. The story of that Wednesday night traffic stop had become something much larger. A reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to do what's right despite the fear. It's the choice to speak up when staying silent would be easier. It's the understanding that justice isn't automatic. It requires people brave enough to demand it. And maybe most importantly, it's proof that no one, absolutely no one, is above accountability when good people refuse to look the other way. Lieutenant Colonel Selene Carter went back to her quiet work, her daily responsibilities, her life of service. But somewhere in Burlington, North Carolina, there's a public record that will exist forever, a reminder that abuse of power has consequences, and that sometimes, just sometimes, David really does beat Goliath. Not with a slingshot, but with a camera, a complaint, and the courage to see it through.